Hello, and welcome to the December iSpa Town Hall. My name is Frank Pizzicalis, and I'm the iSpa Foundation Board Chairman. We have an amazing talk for you today, and I really look forward to this discussion. But before we get started, I want to express our gratitude to SpaSpace for their generous support of this town hall. You can learn more about SpaSpace's offerings and spa operations solutions at spaspace.com. Today, we are going to tap into the expertise of our special guest and my friend, Jan Freitag, the National Director of Hospitality Analytics for CoStar Group, and explore a wealth of hospitality data and key trends. Jan, we have a lot to talk about today. I'm sure you've been pretty busy over the last year and a half. Before we begin, we'd love for you to share a quick overview of your background, as well as CoStar and STR with the attendees.
Yeah, thank you, Frank, so much for having me, and thanks for iSpa having me back on a virtual stage. It's great to connect again virtually as it is, and hopefully soon in person. The last 2 years have been, I guess, unprecedented is what we always say, right? But they have been sort of crazy. I would love to hear what it was for you on the ground. I'm of course always one step removed because I just look at the data. I'm with a company called CoStar, and some of you may remember me from presentations where I was with STR. STR is the hotel data benchmarking company for the global hotel industry. We were purchased by CoStar right before COVID, right at the end of 2019. Randy Smith rode into the sunset, and CoStar absorbed us with the idea is that CoStar is the premier provider of commercial real estate data. So they have very deep insights into apartment rents or office leases or retail or industrial warehouse square footage leases. And they just needed that fifth leg, so to speak. They needed the hospitality expertise. So they purchased STR, and we then have folded the STR data into the CoStar platform. And that's what I've been doing. They tapped me as National Director Hospitality for the CoStar Group about a year and a half, I guess a year ago. And so that's been really interesting because I not only have access to the STR data, which is the property performance data, but also the real estate data. So who's buying, who's selling, what do cap rates look like? What are the trends in real estate in general? So that's been an interesting marriage and really just interesting from a data perspective for me.
Well, that's great. And certainly, many of us know, I'm also quite involved in the hospitality industry in many sectors. And so we've always relied on your data and your analysis of that data is so important for the entire industry. So thank you for that. Now, Jan, as when looking at the recovery of the hospitality industry, what are the primary data points that you focus on?
So until Wednesday before Thanksgiving, we looked at demand and room rate. On Friday after Thanksgiving, we all started to learn Greek and the Greek alphabet. And so now we're all looking at, okay, so there's Omicron, which sounds like a supervillain from the Marvel universe to me, but we also know that there are 6 more letters to come in the Greek alphabet, so we're all sort of worried about that.
Hopefully it'll be over soon.
Right. So the data points are always room demand, right? We always want to know how we're doing compared to, well, in this instance, 2019. It's not hard to outperform 2020. April 7th, the week of April 7th for 2020 was the single worst week the US hotel industry had ever had. So compared to that, everything is better. So our clients and you and a lot of our listeners probably compare themselves to 2019 and see how we're doing to that. And we will talk about that in our forecast a little bit. So room demand, number one. And then the other interesting data point, of course, is room rate, right? We're always trying to see what's the total rooms revenue divided by the rooms demand. That gives you the average rate. How much is an average room in the US cost? And what's been super interesting to see is how quickly room rates have recovered, especially in leisure destinations. If you had a beach or access to the mountains, you are doing quite well oftentimes. Places like Miami, for example, or places like Vail or Aspen, had really seen a pretty sharp decline because people weren't quite sure what was going on in the beginning of 2020. But then in the summer of last year and the summer of this year, we've just come back, guns blazing, so to speak. Room rates are, in some instances, at an all-time high already, and we expect more of that going forward.
And STR recently released an updated U.S. forecast for several key performance indicators. Will you walk us through that forecast and what it means for both the hospitality and spa industries?
Yeah, so the high level, what we're saying is the recovery is ongoing, no doubt about it. Travel is here and is here to stay. And what we're seeing here is that occupancies are actually coming back quite nicely, from the low of, less than half the rooms were filled to in 2022, we're expecting over 6 out of 10 rooms are filled. And then what's good to see is that there's some semblance of pricing power. That room rates are really coming back quite a bit. If you think about that just in your head, you had $100 in 2020, 2 years later, that's a 30% increase, $30 more. That's a 30% increase over just 2 years. That's an incredible increase. Now, we're coming off a very low base. I get that. But still, just think about the pricing power that we have in this industry. But that said, we always want to compare ourselves to 2019. And what you're seeing is that RevPAR, revenue per available room, which is the metric that the hotel industry mostly uses, was 50% off, and now it's 20% off this year. And then it's almost even in 2022, not quite. We have another chart where, maybe you can bring that up, Crystal, where we can talk about how we're doing compared to 2019 when we're indexing it. This is a very different way of looking at the world. We have at STR historically always just looked at percentage change year over year. But because the year-over-year percent change doesn't really matter anymore because 2020 was so low, we now said, okay, let's just set 2019 at 100 and index it, and then see how we're comparing to that 100 line. And what you're seeing here very clearly is, oh, wow, in 2023, we think we will sell more rooms than we did in 2019. And 2019 was the best year ever. We sold 1.2 billion room nights then, and we think we will do the same in 2023. On the room rate side, something very similar. It was the best year in 2019. Oh, wow, we're getting above that in 2023. And then, of course, when you put this all together, supply and demand make occupancy, which I'm not showing here, and occupancy and room rate together make RevPAR. You're seeing that the RevPAR index also exceeds 2019 levels in 2023. So the recovery is here. It's certainly ongoing.
And a very different type of recovery, right, Jan? I mean, when we look at what happened during the Great Recession, I mean, the demand is certainly there. People want to travel, especially to, the types of properties that a lot of our iSpa members are a part of. But it's interesting because in some cases, we know some of our hotels that are actually not even running at full occupancy on purpose because they simply don't have the staff. And so they're running, and their rates, they've got the demand, and so they can certainly maintain the rate. But if you look at it from a RevPAR perspective, if you apply to those rooms that are not being used, it brings it down a little bit. But in terms of ADR, are the forecasted ADR number, is that adjusted for inflation?
Funny you should ask, because it is not. So it is a very, very, very different story when you take inflation into consideration. The inflation rates, transitory or not for us to debate, but the inflation rates are so strong that they really eat into what the room rate pricing power is. And if you adjust room rates that we're projecting forward for inflation, you see that, oh, wow, we're actually not suggesting that inflation-adjusted room rates will return back to 2019 levels in our horizon, so well past 2025. And that has huge, huge, huge implications for the bottom line, obviously, right? Because as you just said, everything is getting more expensive, not just supplies who are stuck on the slow boat from China, but also labor. and labor is obviously well, with inflation, but labor is the single most important topic that gives operators and spa operators really some heartburn right now. Because it's the great resignation, people are switching jobs left and right. The hotel industry has historically not been great at paying very high wages or giving great benefits. And the one word answer to everything in the American economy right now seems to be Amazon, right? And so if you can clean rooms for $15 an hour or drive a delivery truck for $20 an hour where you don't have to interact with anybody if you're not comfortable because of COVID, the choice is clear. And we've lost, hundreds of thousands of workers in the hotel space that we may never see again. So it's a huge issue.
Absolutely. It's massive, massive issue for our industry to grapple with. And certainly at iSpa, we're doing a lot of work, a lot of research around that as well. And it's always fascinating to kind of hear your analysis of the numbers because there's so much more that goes into it, right? Just looking at a raw figure does not tell the whole story. So really always appreciate your sort of your full analysis of that. And so Jan, when you look at the current performance metrics and compare that, how do you compare that to sort of pre-pandemic metrics?
So I think the one thing that's clear is where we used to look at data, maybe quarterly, maybe monthly, and we had the weekly data, and some people looked at it, but maybe not as much as they should. Today, it's all about weekly data. It's all about almost real-time data. The TSA, puts out how many people fly through American airports, every day. So at 9 o'clock, it refreshes for yesterday. And that's what a lot of people pay attention to as an indicator of, how is leisure travel trending? How is business travel trending? So I think we are just a lot more real time than we used to be. And just a quick plug for STR. So there's now forward-looking data available it's called Forward Star as well. So, and that has a lot of people really, really excited. We have done this in Dubai and London and in other markets around the world, but we're finally bringing it to the United States.
No, and your point rings so true. Just thinking about at the start of last week versus the start of this week, a very different scenario, right? And like I'm at a conference here in Boston, a Global Wellness Summit, and so we're looking forward to seeing a lot of people in our industry here. And but again, very different scenario that's playing out right now. But it's also a wait and see, I would think, just in terms of where Omicron is going and the overall effects and how I guess how deadly or not this particular variant is going to be. So certainly, I'm sure you'll be keeping a very close eye on things and how it impacts travel and obviously hospitality.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out, though, that when we look at the national data, that covers a lot. And there really has been a tale of two cities, a tale of two markets, a tale of two customer groups. And specifically, when I think about the higher end hotels that do have spas, a lot of them have done phenomenally well, and we're able to charge room rates that you just never thought were possible. And have done so in the summer of 2020, which was the Great American Road Trip. Everybody just hunkered down in their car and drove wherever. 2021, still there was some international travel, but people said, what, I'm not quite sure. Let me just stay here anyways. The pithy headline that I used on Twitter, was in 2020 that you had 2 shots plus 2 weeks plus $2 trillion in accumulated savings makes for healthy leisure demand. And we've clearly seen that for a broad brush of American hotels and also spas. And we're going to continue to see that on the high end, because as international travel is still a little bit iffy, it turns out America has a lot to offer, and people, stay home and stay put and choose high-end accommodations.
Absolutely. I had a massage yesterday and my wife, April, had a facial and it's such I'm just so grateful to be able to have that and be able to do that. And certainly I think there's huge demand out there. They certainly can't fill the demand. And it used to be, it's interesting. And I'd love to have a talk with you about sort of demand in the spa industry specifically at some point. But, the interesting thing, they used to be constrained by space, how many treatment rooms they had, but now they're constrained by staff, how many massage therapists, estheticians are available. So it's an interesting thing to look at, because it's just a very different way to look at the business. And we talk a lot about dynamic availability in terms of being able to book, only booking the higher margin treatments during peak demand, because like anything else, like room rate, it's something that should be looked at, much more carefully in the spa industry. I think there's a lot of money that's sort of left on the massage table, but from your perspective, what performance trends have surprised you most during the pandemic and this recovery phase?
So I was on a call with an investment banker in mid-April of 2020, and he asked me about Airbnb. And I said, Airbnb is dead. There's no way that anybody is going to rent a home from Jan, because Jan could be a slob or he could be CDC certified. But are you willing to bet your life on it? And I was completely wrong. So the home sharing part of the American hospitality industry has established itself as a go-to choice for families or groups. I'm based here in Nashville. We're not supposed to say bachelorette capital of the world, but we have a lot of leisure demand, and people have been renting houses all along. But I think there are a lot of pockets where home rental is suddenly really, really interesting, because people said, look, I want my own bubble. And if I want to Lysol it down twice a day, I want to be able to do that. And I think VRBO and Airbnb and all the other providers have really tapped into the zeitgeist, into the demand of that. So I was a little bit surprised by how well home sharing did. The other part that was just interesting is we used to call a a drive to market, I don't know, like 2 to 3 hours away from a major metro. And now it's like 12 to 13 hours, like we've all been fine with hopping in the car and going for days, so we didn't have to fly planes. Now that's coming back a little bit if you look at the TSA data, but I just thought it was a really interesting way of the Americans just to get away from where they were after being sequestered at home for months on end. They're like, I need to go, but I don't trust anybody. Let me hop in my car and then let me go to a house and rent a house.
Right. And what trends are you seeing for sort of group and business travel as we approach 2022?
Yeah, next question. No, I mean, that is the $100 billion question, right? So this is a little bit of an extended answer, but on the transient side, in my opinion, a lot of it stands and falls with return to office. Because if you're not in the office, why am I going to fly to the city that you're in? We might as well just do this,
right?
And so that's super interesting to note. And there was just a New York Times article yesterday about that even financial institutions, bankers who never thought they could do this work remotely, suddenly are saying, I can totally do this work remotely. So really interesting to pay attention to what office occupancies continue to look like, because I think there's a relationship to business travel. At the NYU Hotel Investment Conference, the CEO of Choice Hotels made a really interesting point. He said, look, our occupancies for limited service hotels have been super strong because those are business travelers who do stuff with their hands. They're people who climb the telephone poles, who install the machines. They're not white collar thinkers, they're workers. And that demand has been back for sure. And we see that in the occupancies on the lower end, on the lower priced hotels. That's that part. On the group side, it's really, really hard to say. Like there were positive signs of people saying, oh, looks like we've got Delta under control. Let's look forward to Q and Q3. And the CEOs on the CEO panel at the NYU conference were all super bullish, for the lack of a better term, into the second part and the latter part of next year. But now we have this new variant, which it's too early to tell if that's going to cut group travel. I think it's going to certainly have an impact on international travel, which will have an impact on the coastal markets, Vancouver, Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and, Boston, New York, Washington, Miami, because people are just not comfortable traveling abroad, or the countries are not comfortable getting people in. So group travel is a total wild card, but we need it so desperately in the larger markets because we have the super tanker hotels, 1,000 or so room hotels, like something that you're staying in right now. It's so critical, to get it back. But that's very, very hard to judge.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of factors there too. I mean, obviously there's just pandemic fatigue, and I think your point about as people return to office, they start to feel more comfortable in being in settings with other professionals, right? And so I do believe that the more and more that it happens and it feels somewhat normal, and I think there's still going to be certain restrictions and other things that are in place, and people that prefer to wear a mask in a public setting, all of those types of things. But, I do feel that, like you said, once people are feeling more comfortable being back in office, that'll also translate into more business travel because, it'll just become the norm. So we'll have to see how it goes. And like we said, hopefully it's a more muted effect with Omicron than it was with Delta. So
Yeah.
now we touched on this earlier, Jan, on workforce issues. Really are at the forefront of challenges we're currently facing in our businesses. How are labor costs and hiring difficulties impacting recovery within the hospitality industry?
Yeah, so I think the two answers to that, one is innovation and one is wage increases, right? On the innovation front, I think this is going to be your room key going forward. There's no need for you to stay at the front desk in a line of 30 deep. You just get this texted to you and you're on your way. So I think we're going to see a lot more innovation around automation. And then there's also the question of how many services did we provide that we really don't need? Like in the property that you're in, the properties that I stay in, like, do I really need daily housekeeping if I'm staying multiple nights? And the answer is maybe not. Maybe we just change the trash, get you a towel. Do you want to change linen every day? I certainly don't do that at home. Do we need to even get the bed refreshed? Yeah, maybe not. So I think there are innovative practices around housekeeping that will be made permanent. And another thing is just around breakfast. And I just saw that article a couple of weeks ago, that there was this sort of breakfast wars, where people kept piling on new things onto the breakfast buffet. And the owners are saying, look, this is really expensive and we're throwing out a lot of stuff. Can we just come up with 6 items that 90% of the people like? Let's just focus on that and do them really, really well. So that's on the innovation part. But the other part cannot be understated. We're just not great at paying. And if you make $15 changing beds, and making up rooms, versus getting paid $20 to drive an Amazon truck, I think the choice for a lot of people is clear. We've lost a lot of staff, and some of them may never come back, but some of them may come back if we just provide the correct environment, which has to do, yes, with pay, but also with the other benefits that go with it. So I think we're going to see wage inflation is the term that the owners like to use, but I think it has just to do with what makes the job more attractive. And you have better insights on the spa industry, but I would think that that's probably the same conversation that you're having, in that it's really, really hard to find people. And if you have them, they're always sort of one foot out the door, right? So how do you make sure that they stay?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think first off, you're first on innovation. Like we see it here, April and I, we were here. I was doing other work. So when housekeeping came by, I simply said, we hang most of our towels, but, replaced a couple of towels, had the garbages changed, had a couple of bottles of water, a couple of amenities to be replaced. And the housekeeper didn't even have to come in, right? But I think you're right. In terms of mobile apps, we're going to see that becoming where the guest is really in control. Today, they can book their spa treatments and dining reservations and golf tee times. And we're going to see housekeeping become what would you prefer? Either you can do it at check-in and say, I want this pattern every 3 nights or whatever. But I think that'll be even on an ongoing basis. Today, I just would like, some fresh towels, this, and this, and they'll be able to be able to control that. And And it has to be that step that the industry takes because they are short sorts. I know management teams that have to take shifts in housekeeping because they simply just don't have the resources. And so they're all taking their turn doing, housekeeping tasks. So, at the end of the day, we've got to look at innovation to certainly streamline things. But as you said, on the wage front, we got to get that right. Has to right size it, make sure that our employees in our industry are well taken care of and paid accordingly to essentially attract and retain that talent. So yeah, certainly those challenges I think across the board, and certainly the spa industry is not immune to any of that, and in fact is pretty acute at this time.
Mhm.
Now, data is such a powerful tool for spa leaders, but it can also be overwhelming to sort of keep up and utilize properly. What tips do you have for a spa leader who wears many hats and has kind of an overflowing plate, from an operations perspective when it comes just to keeping up with performance data?
I think the first question is always, is it interesting or actionable? And you need to look at all the data that's coming your way and you put it into those two buckets. And the interesting thing, sorry to say, you're just going to leave aside and you look at it on a Saturday afternoon when you have time, but there's stuff that absolutely you have to be able to pinpoint and drill down. What are the 4 or 3 or 5 most important numbers that help me run my business every day? And I'm guilty of this as the next guy, I love more data. Like when in doubt, give me more, and then I start digging into it, but I don't have to make, don't have to make operational decisions. I just have to write articles that I think are interesting, hopefully actionable. But it's, for you as an operator, it is so critical to understand what is the data. And these are very, very few. What are the few data points that I can then take and say, if I tweak this, if I can make an impact on this data point, I will make more money. That's so critical. And that takes a little while. That probably takes some trial and error, that you really focus on, labor costs, but then you realize, oh, it's really, maybe it's a revenue question. And I have very little control over labor costs. Maybe I have to just drive revenue. I don't know. I'm making up this answer, but there is probably a right answer for the spa, but I would just focus on a few. I think less is more. I hate to say this as a data guy, but less is indeed more in this instance.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I think really doing a menu analysis to understand sort of your profit per minute, because at the end of the day, spas are they're selling time, right? And so making sure that when you have a menu this big, and maybe it needs to shrink during periods of high demand, right? So that you're making more profit per minute. You sell that lowest margin treatment, you just tied up a service provider in a treatment room for an hour and made $100 less profit. So they have, I think, looking at your menu and just doing that calculation of what's my margin on each one of these services, what's my profit per minute, and then looking at that, it'll really, I think, come out, like you said, is just looking at those simple metrics that can help you certainly decide on which services to offer during which at certain times. Also how certain services have a bigger drag in retail sales, like a facial versus a wax treatment. I mean, just looking at some very key stats, I think can really change the performance and the financial results of a spa. So no, absolutely, I think your advice is bang on. So we're all looking forward to a brighter horizon next year. So as we close our conversations today, we'd love to hear what you feel sort of hospitality and spa professionals can look forward to as we prepare for 2022.
I think if we've learned anything is that travel is super resilient. In 2007 or 2019 or the year 2000, when things were great, people said, I want to get away. Things are awesome. I have money to spend. And when things are really not great, 2020, 2008 and 9, right after 9/11, people said, man, life is tough. I need to get away. And we are on the receiving end of both of those client groups. We're always there. We're always open, and they're always coming different motivations. So we have to be very clear about that. Why are they there? Are they to splurge, or are they there for self-care? And we have to target our offerings towards that. But we're not going anywhere. The travel industry, the hotel industry, the spa industry is super resilient, and we'll come out of this, with some innovation, maybe with higher labor costs, but also I think with something that customers really truly want and need. And I think this high level term of self-care, is really, really at the forefront of what you're providing, of what we're providing to our customers. So I'm very optimistic about the future. The short term will be super bumpy because this is new. It's new for everybody. You've never led through a pandemic. I've never reported on a pandemic. We're all just making it up as we go along. We look back and it's like, oh, we made some good calls. We made some bad calls, but we made some good calls, and we got through this together, and I think, so that's why I'm very, very optimistic, and I think that the STR forecast will likely hold. So we're going to sell a lot of rooms, into 2023. And we're going to make really healthy top line revenues. The question is, what of that falls to the bottom line?
Right.
But, you and me were similar. I'm optimistic. We're optimists by nature, right?
Right. Absolutely. Well, Jan, we're near the end of our time here today. And I just want to thank you. As always, just super insightful stuff. I mean, there's so many nuggets that certainly I took away from today's discussion. And we'd also like to thank SpaSpace for their support for our town hall. Be sure to visit spaspace.com to learn more about their offerings. And thank you joining us, everyone, today. And we look forward to, and certainly want you and your families to enjoy a wonderful holiday season. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks, iSpa. Bye-bye.